Hey guys, welcome back, and today we have another week of box office, so let's get into it. Up first, we have & Juliet, which went from 97.17 to 97.2, and 1,202,915 to 1,187,866. Nothing really to say in terms of its failure or its success. It's going to do very good in December, and with the stunt casting, it's going to do very good in January and in February. I'm more interested to see what's going to happen once the stunt casting is over. So will & Juliet close this year? No. Is it going to close next year? If it does, it probably won't be until the end of 2026. So maybe like December or like January of 2027. But point is & Juliet is not going anywhere anytime soon, even though in the entirety of this year, it's had probably its weakest box office receipts to date. And again, without the stunt casting, I would think that & Juliet would be kind of in the death's doors, or maybe not the death's doors, but they would be in the we're getting ready to shut down in the next year. The Louis Armstrong musical had a terrible week, from 82% to 61%, and 705K to 563K. So again, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with this show in terms of its box office, because it was seeming to do very good last week and building a momentum, and now it's fallen off again. And it's kind of like expected after, you know, Thanksgiving, before Christmas, that things start to decrease a little bit. Ultimately, this month is a very important month, especially for new musicals, and so we'll see how it does in the next 2 months. But if it continues in the 5s and the 4s and below the 6s, I suspect this will not make it past February. And on the offhand that it does, you know, I think they're just gonna have very bad box office numbers, and I don't think it's gonna be worth it, because they're not gonna win Best Musical, which I think is the only way that they're going to have a successful years-long run, and I don't think that's going to happen. So point is it's going to close in 2025. I don't know when, but sometime in 2025. Now, Back to the Future is ending very strong, with 92.48 last week and 92.2 this week, and 1,115,343 last week, and this week 1,291,512. Cabaret, last week 91%, this week 95%, and 1,192,168 last week to this week's 1,219,044. Again, I still think this should close in March, considering that their 2 new stars have not brought in the box office that it's needed. But if they could find 2 bigger stars, then yes, they could extend, but I have a feeling that they're not going to, and since it is almost the end of the year, and March is only a mere 2.5 months away, I feel like if they were going to extend, they would have announced that sometime in the future, or so, they would have announced it by now, or at least announced a new block of tickets on sale. But as you have seen from previous, past videos, you know my thoughts on these star-studded revivals and how that they're not a good business model long term. Death Becomes Her, 100% last week, 94% this week, and 1,475,403 last week, and this week 1,330,645, another fantastic week. Elf broke the Marquee Theater record with 98% of seats filled this week, and 2,230,419 this week. I mean, wow. And again, Elf is an incredibly popular movie. You know, from the reviews and from the responses from audiences, this is the best the Elf musical has ever been. And clearly, people are looking for an escape. They're looking for a Christmas show, and Elf provided that for them. And it has a certain level of spectacle, even though the set kind of looks like a non-equity tour. It does, in fact, I think, have broad appeal, and so I highly suspect that Elf will come back next year if they can find a theater. And the Marquee Theater has been on a hit streak. The Wiz, Elf, both limited engagements on popular IP, and Stranger Things is bound to be a hit for at least a couple of years, especially with the final season coming out next year. Gypsy played to 96% last week and 90% this week. 1,818,235 last week. This week, 1,567,014. Hadestown made $1 million and played to 100% capacity. Hadestown typically does good over the holidays, but again, without the stunt casting, this would have been closed probably this year. Although it is a good sign that at least in the holidays, without any major stars, Hadestown is still doing $1 million. So again, is this going to close in 2025? Probably not. Is it going to close in 2026? Could potentially happen. We'll have to see what happens in the next 2 months, which I think are going to be pivotal. But Hadestown seems to be like the Phoenix in Harry Potter. It always just comes from the ashes and sees a new day. And I don't want Hadestown to close. I love it. I think Broadway is better for a show like Hadestown being there. But its box office has lost steam since 2023, and they have relied heavily on stunt casting. And there's no big stunt casting coming up. And that makes me wonder, have they run out? Because eventually you do run out, and when that happens, you gotta pray to the theater gods that the audiences come to see it again. And I don't know if that's gonna happen. Hell's Kitchen, 95% last week, and 1,487,941 to this week's 94.70 and 1,452,601. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, maybe happy ending. Best week ever. I think this was the first week where it actually was profitable, or just about, with 95% last week, 95% capacity this week, and 764K last week, and this week 810K. A fantastic week for Maybe Happy Ending with a top ticket of 317. This has made a comeback that no musical has made in a long time. I mean, you have the exceptions. You have your Beetlejuices, you have Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, but even more obscure productions like Akimbo or Band's Visit or Fun Home, you know, were never at the bottom of the barrel and then had a huge comeback like this. Now, Dead Outlaw did announce that they're opening, which I think is going to create some crazy competition for Maybe Happy Ending, because they both need to win Best Musical, but especially Maybe Happy Ending. But I love what they're doing with their marketing. They got the woman who does the marketing for Great Gatsby, and that has helped tremendously with sales. But I think mainly it's the incredible critic responses that it got, and the fact that this has gotten good word of mouth. And sometimes there are just shows that the whole community gathers around that gains that momentum, and again, it does not happen often, if ever. This is very much an exception. So if there were other productions that think we can, you know, maybe capture this, we can do this, it's easier said than done. And again, Maybe Happy Ending's plot is just very simple for people to get, and it seems like they are, in terms of marketing, taking that simple concept and taking advantage of it, as opposed to something like Akimbo or A Strange Loop, where the concepts and even the title of the show was hard to understand. There's a great post that I will put here that I think is a great tool that they're using to like explain the show. Also, Maybe Happy Ending is just a very good production, and it is a lot more mainstream and accessible than any of the prestige Best Musical winners, minus Illinois, but that was more of a dance piece, and it was a limited engagement. But overall, Maybe Happy Ending is on the right track. I think they'll make it to the Tonys. It needed to make 800K at least, and it did that. Hopefully it can make 900K this upcoming week, and then $1 million. That would be phenomenal. But even if it doesn't get to $1 million, it has definitely made the comeback that producers and investors need to fully believe in this property. It's going to struggle in these next 2 months, but I think it will make it. As long as it doesn't go past 600K for more than 1 week, it'll be fine. 1 week of 500K, fine. You know, even if a second week, maybe a month later. But, you know, if it does 5s and 4s consistently, then yes, they're going to close. It's still in danger, but I think that it will make it. And I think this could do big wins at the Tonys And again, maybe Happy Ending is such an intriguing comeback story that you just don't see often. And even I couldn't have predicted that it would have made this kind of comeback, because it just doesn't happen, you know? Even something like Shucked, which did better out the gate, it had the low ticket price and it started off bad, but then they got the momentum, you know, was mainly because of the Tonys. And once the Tonys went away, the show kind of fell down. So maybe Happy Ending is kind of this very rare, small musical that's made a comeback that you won't see again for many more years to come. Moulin Rouge went from 95% to 92% and 1,336,128 to this week's 1,284,599. So it is doing good business even without stunt casting. And again, it's another show like Hadestown that has relied on stunt casting. And we saw what happens when without stunt casting. It's pretty bad. And Boy George is coming back in, so again, I think Moulin Rouge's days are numbered, but they're gonna make it for a little bit longer. And it is still good that even without any big stars, they are still bringing in over $1 million over Christmas. I think once they aren't able to do that is when I think they'll very much consider closing/close. So, but I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon. Suffs is going out on a high note, playing to 101% capacity, and 1,051,569 last week, and this week 1,070,959. Sunset Boulevard 95% and 1,900,668 last week. This week 92% and 1,666,124. Swept Away 99% last week, 87% this week, and 657K last week to this week's 499K, and that is closing, so it doesn't really matter, and it proved that the extension was not worth it. The Great Gatsby went from 96.64 last week to this week's 98.75 and a whopping 1,568,955 last week to this week's 1,774,769. And honestly, guys, I can't believe the show is doing so well. I mean, we all know it was going to do well, but I didn't think it was going to do this well. Obviously, Jeremy and Eva's presence helped, but I think The Great Gatsby being a beloved, best-known book, and it really being a spectacle, family fun show that's classic musicals is, I think, what attracts people to the show. I may or may not have seen a totally legal version of the show online because I don't want to spend money on Great Gatsby. And all I'll say is that, it's made me very, sad for the state of the way art is created and the way that audiences perceive something as good or bad. I don't want to get into it other than to say is, I get it. Like, I get why people like Great Gatsby and why it's doing so well, but I also don't get it. It's not a horrible show. It's just kind of there. And that's the worst kind of show. But, again, they've had a very good marketing campaign. They've had great buzz. So, and again, if it wasn't The Great Gatsby, I don't think it would be doing this well, obviously. And it is interesting because, like, I didn't think it was going to do well because musical comedies aren't the thing right now. But I think the reason why is because they're either lesser known properties like Some Like It Hot, or they're completely original like Something Rotten, both of which didn't do well financially, even though they had respectable, time runs when they were in New York, when they were in the city, when they were in New York. But yeah, and Shocked didn't last long at all. It didn't even go for a year. So as you can see, these musical comedies kind of don't hit the way that they did before, but it seems like Great Gatsby is that exception. So again, it is very interesting to see that. And Death Becomes Her too, but again, how much of that is because of the property, and if it wasn't a property, would it be doing this well? I don't think so. But maybe they would do good anyways, because I do think they are of a, Death Becomes Her is of a much higher quality than a lot of the new musical comedies that have come out. But a lot of it's just that the new musical comedies just are not up to par with the old ones, that being The Producers, Spamalot, that was the kind of the not golden age, but that's when all of the musical comedies came out in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and then we transitioned to Spring Awakening and that whole era. The Outsiders had a mammoth week, selling out, and 1,587,269 last week, and 1,729,871. And Wicked made $3 million and 100% capacity. Another interesting thing is Wicked is going on digital at the end of this month. Very excited about that for the deleted scenes. But it doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint because Wicked is at 586.3 million as of December 26th. So that was yesterday. And internationally, they just didn't take off. So they're gonna pass the $600 million mark. I suspect that by the end of like Saturday and Sunday, I suspect this will be at like 630, 640, 650. And so it will probably finish. I think they'll make another 50 million. So I say that it's probably going to end with like a 7 in front of it, 700 million, which again, highest grossing movie musical, financial success. It made back its money, it made a profit, it was a huge home run for Universal. Everyone can walk away excited. But again, in my opinion, I think it wasn't smart for them to put it out so early. I think that this is a slow burn, and I think they should have allowed that slow burn. I don't think the second part is as mainstream or as fun as part 1. So I think part 1 is going to make less money than part 2, though I could be completely wrong. And it seems like Wicked's not going to make $1 billion. And again, I'm sorry, but I think that's a bit of a disappointment that Wicked, this $1 billion mega kind of corporation, failed to make $1 billion at the movies. And again, internationally, they had weaker numbers than they probably were expecting. So they had to rely truly on just domestic numbers, which most movies don't. Normally, most movies get more money internationally than domestically, and that's why a lot of movies succeed. And so many people were thinking it was going to be the Barbie of this year, but I think the reason why this could never be the Barbie was because Barbie wasn't a movie musical. Barbie was not even 120 minutes long, and it was a lot more of a cultural phenomenon than Wicked is. Wicked is a cultural phenomenon as a musical, and now as a movie it's huge on TikToks with the dances or whatever, but it very much appeals to not a niche crowd, but a very large but contingent small, I don't want to call it small, but just a not like universal crowd. Like Barbie was universal, it was all over the place, everyone, whereas with Wicked it's kind of more like this, instead of this. It's more of like a planet and then a solar system, I guess. And again, big fan base, but again, I do think Wicked has its fans, and I don't know if it maybe necessarily won over a lot of non-musical theater fans and people that didn't know the musical, didn't know the musical, didn't like it, right? But I don't think it brought in, like, maybe it made like 60% of that, but I don't think it brought in the whole competition. And again, I do think Moana 2, Mufasa, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, there's a lot of competition with that similar kind of demographic and audience, and maybe you could think Wicked, which again, it's the kind of movie that needs to be put out in the holidays, would have maybe benefited from coming out in a less competitive time, like January, which sounds so stupid because then it would have to wait a year for the Oscars, and there's a lot of reasons why it shouldn't do that, but they would have a full 2 months all to themselves when there's nothing to see. And I think that, movie musicals have made a huge comeback since 2021 when there was so many failures, but at the same time, I do believe that the movie musical definitely is not like a guaranteed hit. Like, sub, comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.